Okay, welcome everyone to another Research in Focus interview here in the School of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Queensland. My name is McDonald and I'm joined today by Steve Bell and Feng, who are the authors of a new book, The Rise of the People's Bank of China, which is out now with Harvard University Press, or is hitting bookshelves and online retailers any day now. How did you come to write this book?
I think the initial idea was remember the joke, Bell goes to Beijing or something? I'd written a book on the Reserve Bank of Australia, so I had some form in writing about central banks and the politics of central banking, and Steve had done his PhD and we were talking about joint projects, and I said, what about a book on the People's Bank of China? So the book combines Steve's vast empirical experience and knowledge of Chinese political economy, and I kind of contribute theory of ideas.
That does sound like a match made in heaven.
It's been a very good collaboration.
There are obvious reasons, like the Chinese central bank is in charge of monetary policy for the second largest economy in the world, and it manages the largest pile of reserves in the world. But there are also some specific events that triggered our interest in doing a book on the Chinese central bank, particularly around the year of 2004, because at that time there was emerging organized international pressure against China to revalue its currency. So because the central bank was in charge of exchange rate, so it stands at the interface between the Chinese government and the international community. So it becoming under the international spotlight. At the same time, but more importantly, at that time, there's a case that the central bank runs a different view with the government on the state of the Chinese economy, and the bank resorted to a unilateral action against government. So that's quite in a sharp contrast with our common knowledge of the Chinese central bank as just a public agency.
And the Chinese political system
Yes,
as well.
yes.
So, I mean, you suggest in the book that the rise of the People's Bank of China is a particular puzzle, given the ruling elite has traditionally been guarded, or has traditionally guarded its monetary and financial autonomy. What were your conclusions about how you could make sense of the rise of the people's, of the central role that it ended up taking on in economic reform in China in that context?
Basically, this is a common story with any really good central bank, and in the end it boils down to expertise, and central bankers know markets and know the monetary system far more than politicians do, or ever can, basically. So that's the bottom line, basically. I used to joke that the Reserve Bank of Australia gained independence under Paul Keating, and Paul Keating was a control freak, and so it can happen in Australia, it can happen in communist China. It's exactly the same set of dynamics that the RBA, despite causing a recession and a big mess in terms of the early 90s recession, rose to a position of independence because of these institutional conditions of expertise and knowledge, and arcane knowledge that really no one else has to that extent, and they can use that if they're good and they have a policy capacity, expertise, links with the international epistemic community of central bankers. A good policy track record is really crucial. If you stuff things up too often, you won't get credibility or independence or anything. So the PBC is the People's Bank of China. Is a good example of a pretty good central bank that's clawed its way up the hierarchy through those sort of mechanisms.
So it's an important empirical story, given the size of China's economy and given those distinctions traditionally between those types of agencies and the Chinese government. But it's also a kind of an important theoretical story about the context in which institutional change becomes possible. So this relates, I know, Steve, to some of your theoretical research on institutional transformation and some of the work that you've been doing with the institutional transformation cluster research cluster here at UQ. Do you want to talk about some of those things and how they apply to?
Yeah, a lot of the ideas around institutional change have been kind of worked through in this book over a kind of a large-scale empirical project tracing the evolution of the bank across the last kind of 3 decades or more. So basically, the modelling and the theory works in terms of dislocating agents inside institutions like the People's Bank of China, and looking at the capacity of agents to exploit institutional resources, particularly expertise, etc., and connections, to develop capacities in terms of essentially institutional authority, and how that then maps into interacts with wider kind of contexts. In particular, in the book we outline a number of contexts. The summary of all this was published recently in Political Studies, a short version of it, but it's basically agents inside the central bank developing capacities and then interacting with wider ideational, policy and power contexts, and the main power context, of course, is the party state. And we trace through those interconnections, and that those sort of interconnections and feedbacks trace the rising. The variable we're tracing is the rising authority of the PPC. So that's how we come to explain it.
That's great. Obviously, given those types of questions about institutional change are central to broader structure agency debates that have long dogged political science and social sciences. So lots theoretically there even for those who don't have a direct interest in the People's Bank of China. I'm assuming, Hui, that you conducted most of the elite interviews in Beijing, much as I was compelled by the idea of an alternative title of Bell Goes to Beijing. I think that could have at least been the subtitle for the book. Can you talk us through some of the challenges and then the benefits of interview and who you interviewed and some of the sort of challenges and benefits of that?
Yeah, definitely it's a huge challenge, but also a great benefit to the book. Because China studies, particularly the studies on Chinese elite politics and policy making, suffers from a common problem of lack of access to the senior officials. In this book, we cover a range of issues. Many of them are critical and very sensitive issues like interest rate reform, exchange rate reform, financial reform in China. So we over the years we managed to build a contact network in Beijing, particularly in the central government. We managed to sit down with these contacts and to seek their ideas and their stories. Many of them are willing to speak on record on the belief that by revealing their ideas and stories, the outside world will have a better understanding of what really happened in China, the policy context, and via various challenges and dilemmas Chinese policymakers faced. So we hope that this book can live up to that expectation.
Nice. So I'm sure it will. So
I might add that the PBC is a kind of a crusading organisation too, because the big politics in Beijing is liberal reformers that want a more market-oriented system, albeit state capitalist nevertheless, versus conservatives, the old guard. And the PBC is one of the vanguard institutions in the liberal camp, moving politics in a broadly liberal direction. So the PBC is highly, all this is about politics. This is a highly political environment with intense bureaucratic and internal party struggles. It's a big issue about where China's going.
So do you see, in that context, is there a possibility that the growing power of the PBC could in fact be sort of part of a broader shift to democratisation in China, or is that too much of a...
I think that's a big bridge, probably too far at the moment. This is about elite, hierarchical politics within the party state, which is still authoritarian. It's those sorts of power struggles. We do, I think in the last sentence of the book, we mentioned the word democracy, as everyone does. Perhaps, but this is not a story about incipient democracy creeping out of the People's Bank or anything.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for your time. We've been joined today again by Professor Steve Bell and Dr. Hui Feng here in the School of Political Science and International Studies. And the book is The Rise of the People's Bank of China. It's out now, published by Harvard University Press. Thank you, Steve. Thank you.